Welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Simon.
And I'm Stuart.
We're both property people running our own businesses. This podcast is just us chatting, as we often do, about anything and everything property. Before we get started, I'd just like to put in a quick request. If you're enjoying this podcast, please do tell someone else about it who you think might enjoy it as well. And for today, I think we're going to start off, Stuart, with a problem tenant that you've got at the moment. Do you want to give us some background?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm sure many of us in the property industry are seeing this at the moment. Fortunately, 90% plus of the tenants I have, and as you know, I've got a number of rooms, but also a couple of buy-to-lets. One of them, mentioned on previous podcasts, upped and left, disappeared. So we never saw him or his partner again. But I would like to add, they did leave the flat in very good condition, so tidied it and everything else. So they were very respectful, but didn't communicate for a month or so, and then we found out they left. So that was one. I have another one where we've had very sporadic payment. In fact, we received no payment literally from the moment that the lockdown was announced on March 23rd or whenever it was. And it was interesting at that time because I think the kind of ability to pay was said. Basically, they said they couldn't continue to pay the rent after the notice, but the rent was due before the lockdown announcement, I believe. So we'd had some challenges previously as well with missed rent payments. This is pre-COVID. We then didn't have payments for a month or so, maybe 2 months. I don't know the specifics. Unfortunately, the tenant had lost their jobs, and we looked into that, and it seemed to take some time to get the universal credit. But then the payments have been lower. We've had sort of rent payments that have come in lower, sometimes just £5 lower than they should be. The arrears hasn't been resolved, and the biggest frustration from my perspective and from an investor stroke landlord perspective is that I've always said to the tenants, just communication is key if they're in a problem. And we've had this problem for some time now. And all I've been asking for via the agent in this case is a plan. I just want to know what the plan is for the rent. And I then uncovered, because I said, what's happened with the rent? I seem to be getting paid on a new day. Oh, they've moved the rent. Now, being a renter myself, I said, well, you can't just simply move your rent day, because actually that now means that when they've moved it back 2 weeks, I said, you've essentially got a 6-week month then. So I'm now missing 2 weeks rent as well as the previous few months. And the agent, who I have to say didn't actually call that out, and they should have done. So we're in a situation where I've got this problem tenant. We'll put it in that basket. Mm-hmm. And you and I were discussing the eviction. So when we say this is a podcast about us chatting, hopefully it's not us moaning. It's just us. It is just us talking about and learning together. Because I learned, because you were talking about the new eviction rules, because I haven't looked into it in depth, which I absolutely need to. But you were talking about so we know that there's now sort of 6 months, I think, until March now before we can evict tenants basically for non-payment of rent. But you were talking a little bit more about what underpins that, and there are some other areas of that.
Yeah, we first of all, let me just say, this is a dangerous podcast to record, because these rules do seem to be changing on a weekly, if not daily basis. So there's every chance that between us recording this and the date it's due to go live, everything we're about to talk about will be wrong. So anyone listening to this, please don't rely 100% on what we say. Not only are we not legal professionals, we are also recording this in advance. So do you check the actual final rules and the ones that apply at the time when you need the information.
When in doubt, speak with a legal professional, not your local podcast.
Yes, indeed. Mostly good advice, unless you're looking for light entertainment. So as it currently stands, the overarching principle, I think, of the new notice period rules are that you should expect to need to give 6 months notice. This applies to Section 21 and Section 8. So Section 21 is no fault eviction. So it's when you're just asking the tenant to leave. Generally speaking, it can be for any reason. A reason doesn't apply effectively. And Section 8 grounds is when there is a reason. So they're misbehaving in some way, or the rent is overdue, or whatever. There's a whole collection of different grounds within Section 8 that can apply. And pretty much all of them now have a 6 months notice period. And the stated aim is that will apply until the end of March next year. So that, on the surface, sounds bad. You now have to give 6 months notice. And of course, Stuart, you mentioned one of your concerns is that once you give notice to a tenant, especially one who's struggling with rent or what have you, they may well actually at that point just say, oh, well, I have to leave anyway, so I'm not going to bother paying any more rent now.
Yeah.
You can't do anything to me for 6 months. You can't start the court process until the end of that notice period. And then even when you do start the court process, we as seasoned landlords know it can then be a number of further months beyond that. And that's in normal times, never mind times now where courts are extra stretched because of COVID issues. So that's not a very inviting prospect. However, the new regulations do seem to include some other options, perhaps I should say. So if your tenant already has 6 months of rental arrears, so the words used here are, and rent arrears at the time of service of the notice are not less than 6 months. Quite why the language has to be so confusing, I'm not sure. But anyway.
Legal. What they get paid for, just to make it confusing.
Right. Make sure that you have to speak to a legal professional just to actually understand the words. But anyway, so if your tenant owes you at least 6 months rent, then you only need to give them 4 weeks notice. So if a tenant has stopped paying rent and they've already got a bit of a backlog that's built up over the last few months, it may actually be beneficial to wait another 2, 3, 4 months and then serve a 4-week notice period rather than serve a 6-month notice period now and then suffer the ongoing lack of rental payments for another 6 months. So this is not simple. This is all very convoluted and far harder than I feel it should be. But anyway, and there are also other shorter periods available. So, for example, if you're needing to evict someone for antisocial behaviour, again, you can do that with a notice of 4 weeks. And I think, although I can't see it right in front of me in this that I'm looking at the moment, there's also a shorter period for cases of domestic abuse. So you can, I think, again, that's a 4-week notice period, although as I can't actually find that on that. Oh, sorry, I can't find that in this document in front of me at the moment. Speaking of which, this document is a very thorough article on a website called nearlylegal.co.uk, and we'll include a link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, I did question that website just for the audience's benefit. It's a bona fide legal website, just for anyone that was concerned about the website searches that were going on. Nearly Legal is totally related to legal. Just wanted to get another caveat out there.
Yeah, it's written by a lawyer who specialises in property law. So yeah, very much appropriate for us. And it's an excellent site actually to subscribe to the emails from, because he's normally very prompt at posting new articles about changes to the laws and regulations.
Well, it's brand new to me, and I have to say it looks like a really useful resource, one that I will be adding. So I've learned from this episode, if nothing else.
So I think from what you said, Stuart, your tenant's not currently 6 months behind because they've been paying bits and pieces. So do you have a feel, or do you actually know how many months worth of rent they currently owe?
Yeah, that's the question. I think I need to go back and check, but I think they didn't. I think it's probably about 3 months worth Where are we, August? 3 or 4 months it will be.
Okay, so you're probably not quite at the 6-month level. So then the question is, what are they currently paying? How quickly would they get to that 6 months behind point?
So that's when we say 6 months behind. Are you thinking about that as a total value? So, for example, if the rent were £500, it'd have to be £3,000 in arrears.
Yes, exactly that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't think they're quite there yet. They're probably 2/3 of the way, I would say.
And you said that they've shifted the date that they're paying each month. How much of the rent owed are they paying each month?
So that would be basically half of the rent. So there is half a month as well to add to that. So
every month there's another half month to add to their debt, effectively.
Well, no, the way I see it is that 1 month they should have paid a 6-week period, but they're now paying on a new set date.
Okay, so you at the point at which they pay, they've built up an extra half month of debt.
Yeah.
But then are they paying the full month's rent currently when they do make payments?
Mostly. I mean, sometimes, laughably, we are literally a few pounds short. So I appreciate these conversations are very difficult. This is another thing when we have these types of conversations, because I don't want to sort of walk into rogue landlord territory and sound like these sort of uncaring landlords that we're all painted to be. And I can say with my hand on my heart, I have reached out to the tenant even personally just to ask for what the current situation is. There was a period of time where we had no communication, no payment. And this is pre-COVID, by the way. No communication, no payment, no nothing. Where I said to the agent before I reached out, I said, look, all I want to know is, what the situation is. If the tenant is struggling, I just want to know that, because I can plan for it and I can at least speak with the tenant, because I understand if you're in a difficult situation and the world looks like a dark place, what I would like to do is alleviate some of that and say, look, you're having challenges. I tell you what we'll do. We will pause rent for 3 months, 4 months. You can get back on your feet. And actually that would take something off the tenant's mind. So that is my thinking. So I just want to be really clear that we've had these conversations pre-COVID. So that's happened. We've had non-payment pre-COVID. And then obviously we've had the COVID situation. So I like to think that we've taken a proactive, helpful stance on it before we've gotten to this stage. And I just wanted to make that clear, because, I have integrity and I have kids, and if they rented, I'd want the same for them. So,
yeah, exactly. I think, as you say, obviously the ideal would be to talk to the tenant and say, you owe this much rent every month, and you've got this much historic rent owed as well. So let's look at a payment plan where you pay the month's rent plus a little bit of the debt off every month. But you're absolutely right. It may well be that the tenant just isn't in a situation where that can work at the moment. So perhaps for the time being, you'd actually be saying, well, how about we work out what you can afford every month? And maybe that's only 75% of the rent that they actually owe each month. So every month they will be going a little bit more into debt. But as long as you know that's the plan, and you know that they have a longer term plan for in a few months being able to find a new job, or in a few months choosing to move out themselves to somewhere where they can afford better or whatever, then at least you know where things are going. And as you say, you know what to expect.
Yeah.
It really is all about communication and knowing what both sides can cope with.
And I think the challenge with rulings like this from the government is not that, because I'm sure every one of us would agree, we want the vulnerable, we want those in need to be protected. We don't want people being kicked out on the streets. We want that to happen. We want security. However, we also have to bear in mind that there are two sides to every coin, and that equally we have businesses. These are businesses, and that there has to be a level of ownership. For me as a renter, I was in a situation where I thought I mightn't be able to meet my rent requirement. The first thing I did was I spoke to the landlord about it. It so happens that we were able to work it out. And I'm not pleading poverty by any stretch of the imagination, but my point is that I had to take ownership from that and go, okay, how could I work this out with whomever I need to work it out with? And my biggest concern with a period like 6 months is that it takes some of that ownership away from that percentage. And I'm sure it's a small percentage of people that like to not take ownership for what they do. Because if you're in a situation, I think, where if you are working and you're saying you can't afford the rent, and we don't know that's the case, but if you're not meeting your rent fulfillment every month, then there's clearly a challenge there. Then clearly you need to look at other options. This property is a lovely property overlooking a park. It's Victorian, etc., etc. And I'm saying, well, maybe there's now another option for you. Yeah, and I know there are, because I'm in the property game and in the area. So there comes a time when you just have to say, actually, maybe I can't afford this, and that's where we come to. So
Yeah.
it's not that they are now not working and in a bad situation. So they are working. Maybe they're not earning as much as they were before, but you and I both know that if that happens to us, what would we do?
You have to look at making adjustments, so that you can fit things in again to the means you have. And yeah, whether that's making savings in other areas of your life, or whether that's finding a new property that's more within your budget, then yeah, that's just the actions you need to take. And it may well be that you need to ask your current landlord or your property owner or agent, that's what I'm trying to say, about options for that. And you need to say, this is the current situation. I'm taking ownership of it. I can't afford this rent anymore. I will pay what I can, and I will be looking for something else instead. And hopefully the landlord would be able to show some flexibility in helping to support that. Of course, landlords often rely on their income to provide, also rely on their rental income to provide for their own food and housing requirements. So there isn't always that much flexibility to be had there. But without communication, without talking about it, you just don't know.
No, and that brings up the past prospect, where I think one tenant I had simply said, "Well, just get yourself a mortgage holiday." And again, for me, it's not a generic attitude I've seen. It's been a marginal one, but is again one of an attitude whereby responsibility wasn't taken. So the responsibility was, well, actually, I won't pay. You can just take a mortgage holiday. And my response was, but if you can afford to pay the rent, you should be paying the rent. And by the way, I can only get a 3-month holiday if you're under duress and you can't afford the rent, which if you can should be happening. And also I have to, we've talked about this on previous podcasts, and unfortunately I think it's come to fruition, is that as soon as if I took a mortgage holiday, I would then be in a negative place, because I would find it more challenging to get mortgages. Now that has happened because of the bounce back loan we've talked about. So I think in my view, as well as many others, has been proved right, which the banks may have offered it, but it would have consequences. So where people aren't considering their responsibilities, they're just trying to hand it off onto others, like the landlords, where we actually do have to face up to those responsibilities.
Yes, exactly. As moving the problem sort of along the chain doesn't actually solve it. It really does just move it. Have you seen I think they're calling them tenant hardship loans that they're offering in Scotland. This is an interest-free loan that's available to tenants in Scotland to help them cope with the effects of COVID on their income, and obviously be able to afford to pay their rent.
No, I haven't heard that.
No, I haven't read very much in way of detail on it, but yeah, it does seem to be a thing, and quite a lot recently where Scotland leads, England and Westminster seem to follow. So perhaps we'll see something along those lines introduced.
It's positive in a way where it's putting responsibility where responsibility should be, because in a commercial environment, there's been a bit of an uproar in terms of commercial tenants, retailers, restaurateurs not paying rents. Now, are the commercial premises owners taking that line down? Of course they're not, because they're the ones that own the properties. But this is getting me on a bit of my soapbox, which is I feel like as landlords, the can gets kicked down the road until it gets kicked to us, and then it's, well, actually no, the landlord can take it, because what we're effectively saying here is that we will have to stomach the losses because we are, and even if we can, we all know the challenges of the process. We'd have to wait 6 months, then we serve the notice, then we've got to go through the courts. Most of us, well, certainly from my point of view, depend on the level of rent. I would just say, if I can get the property empty, I just want to move on and get going. Depending, I have followed some things up out of principle, but why that has to sit with us as landlords, I don't know. That's the thing that gets my goat, Simon.
Well, I'm going to give you sort of two answers to that, I think. So right now, in these unprecedented times of COVID, we are all feeling massive impacts from the war on the virus and our government's choices around how to deal with that. And of course, everyone in society needs to help and work towards the war on the virus. However, the choices that the government make in how they are going to react to it and the things they are going to change in our society, they need to take responsibility for. And I don't think it's fair that a can is kicked all the way down the line and lands at the landlords when it's the government that actually kicked the can in the first place. They should take responsibility for that and deal with it. However, outside of these unprecedented times, I think landlords do take on a level of that responsibility because that's part of the business of property. You accept that there are risks, and this is why there are quite reasonable rewards and why it is not an appropriate business for everybody, because not everyone will have the reserves to cope with that, or the
mental fortitude.
That's the phrase. Thank you. Yes, to actually see themselves through it. So I think that there's multiple answers to that, and obviously at the moment you're talking about it in COVID times, and I completely agree. It has changed everything, really.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And I wouldn't complain about it. I've got about 37 rooms. Some are with students, some are young professionals, some are empty, some get trashed, as we've talked about. But you're absolutely right. I accept that, and that was my choice, as a business owner, to go into that business. So I'm completely with you. I think my just to be clear from my side for the audience, just so I don't sound too unbalanced, is that I think sometimes the odds, certainly from a governmental perspective, seem stacked slightly against us. So that's all I'm saying, really. And as every landlord and investor knows, we are dealing with numerous elements from the government in terms of the removal of tax rate relief, mortgage interest rate relief, and so on, which I won't go into here because I think we're coming towards the end of the podcast. So hopefully I've now stepped back down from my soapbox.
Yeah, but before we go full on moan, we'll draw it to a close.
We better.
Okay, so I think it's my turn to close things up this time. So I will simply say, again, if you have enjoyed listening to us moan and complain about things on this episode, and maybe even educate you a little bit on notice periods, please do tell someone else about this episode and this podcast. Point them to thebusinessofproperty.com, which is also where you can find show notes for all of the episodes. And we will see you again next week.
See ya.